I'm Kate Grant, I'm CEO of Fistula Foundation, and I'm joined today by my dear friend and partner for this exhibit.
I'm McCammon. I'm the founder and president of Quilts for Empowerment. And our women in Kenya created this exhibit of fistula art to describe the experience of having a fistula.
You might be asking, what's a fistula? I've not heard of that. Well, specifically, fistula is actually a generic medical term for a hole between an internal organ and the outside world that shouldn't exist. But in this case, we're talking about obstetric fistula. It's a childbirth injury. It happens to women that stay in obstructed labor, the kind of labor that if you were in this country would probably get you a C-section 24 hours in. But if you're in Africa or Asia without access to emergency obstetric care, you'll stay in labor, sometimes as long as a week. Usually your baby will die. You'll be left too often incontinent. And what happens on top of that incontinence is, again, too often you're made a social outcast. That's really, really brutal news. But the good news is, most of the time, it's curable with surgery. And this exhibit is to help you and others understand this issue. Marianne, you said you're retired, but what did you do when you were working?
When I was working, I was a nurse, and it was something I always wanted to do. I started working for an OBGYN, and it just became my passion. And my whole focus was on women's health, and I was just drawn to working with and helping other women.
Marianne, can you help me understand how you got interested in using quilting as a way of healing?
I think it goes to my own personal enjoyment and satisfaction from creating with quilting. And actually the first volunteer work I did after I retired in 2000 was to teach quilting at a women's prison in Oregon, and I did that for 12 years. Knowing how quilting could transform women's lives in prison, I was thinking maybe the same thing could apply to women in Kenya. I mean, I had no idea where it was going to go when I first went. And as it evolved over these last 4 years, we've gone from a room full of teenagers giggling and having a good time sewing and maybe not having to do chores, to working with adult women who enjoy being together, enjoy doing the sewing, and take home money to pay their children's school fees and buy medicine and food.
It began when Marianne spent 3 weeks in Kenya working with Quilts for Empowerment's fistula survivors. The program is located in the town of Luanda, in an impoverished area of northwest Kenya. The program's Kenyan director, Nora Otondo, a fistula survivor herself, asked the fistula survivors to identify the most important things that others need to know about fistula. After much discussion, the women agreed on 7 main topics, which then became the content for each art panel. Using sheets of white paper, Nora asked the women what the content should be for each panel. Everyone agreed on the number of women, their postures and expressions, and the background content for each panel. Lorna demonstrated how the woman in the emotional suffering panel should look. Mock-ups of the key elements for each panel were then cut out of brown paper and taped into position by the women. After outlining the major elements with chalk, the stitching began. Nora created and appliqued all the human figures, often working late into the night. She was very happy when the first of the panels was almost completed. Her goal of completing the project in 2 weeks was now within reach. It was the women's commitment to finish this project that made it possible for Marianne to take the completed panels home to Oregon in her suitcase. This was because the women left their homes and families to spend 2 weeks sewing and living together in the program office, sharing mattresses and cooking collective meals. Each woman went home with a lot of pride in addition to the money they earned from working on the project. The 7 panels in this exhibition represent the actual lives of the quilters. Here, in their own words, are how they were personally experienced. The first panel depicts a long labor, the main cause of obstetric fistula, as told by Everline.
Siku ngapi hivi? Nilikuja for 2 weeks. Alikufa yani. Kutoka kwa tumbo yani biladikaa sana kwa manini. Tena nilienda mkuu. Na sasa ikianza kutoka nasikianga sasa kama siko mzuri kwa wengine na kuwa fear.
The second panel shows a woman grieving a dead baby. Over 90% of women with fistula deliver a stillborn baby. Too often, they are put in a cardboard box and buried without the mother knowing where the grave is located. Lorna not only experienced a stillbirth, but the loss of her uterus as well.
Vile mtoto alikufa ni wakapata nilitokwa na kila kitu kwa tumbo, wakasema hii si kitu ya kawaida. Sasa watu wangu walinikimbia yako kidogo, hata bwana kaanza kusema mtu mwenye anatokwa na uchafu yote hivi tutakaaje. Mwishowe ndio nilirudi tu nyumbani, nikakaa kwa chini, nilikuwa mgonjwa. Tukaanza kuongea polepole, tukasikizana tena, tukarudi kwa pamoja.
The third panel depicts an attempted sexual assault, which, as Nora describes, is also a cause of fistula.
In addition to long labor, other causes of fistula are surgery, being born with it, that is congenital fistula, and sexual assault. And in sexual assault is where maybe a man forces young girls to have sex with them, or even older women without their consent. And when this happens, then the penetration wraps through the rectum or the bladder, and then it tears them off, and so a woman leaks urine or stool.
Regardless of how they got their fistula, all women experienced profound emotional suffering, as shown in the fourth panel. Here, Matron describes the 18 years she lived with her congenital fistula before being repaired.
Nilisaliwa na fistula, sasa ilikuwa ngumu kutembea na watu, kuenda kanisani, kuenda shule. Sasa nilikuwa nakaa peke yangu.
Na umekuwa nayo kwa muda gani?
Kwa miaka 18.
Nancy describes the constant leaking that caused every woman terrible physical suffering, the topic of the fifth panel.
Sikuwa natembelewa, hata kanisani sikuwa naenda juu hata watu walikuwa nasema huyu mtu sio, ukienda kwake ni mtu ananuka mkojo. Hata wakati nilikuwa napanda mboga, sasa hata mboga watu wakataa kuja kununua. Juu walikuwa nafikiria nashika na mkojo juu ya harufu mbaya.
The sixth panel shows the importance of knowing that fistula is treatable, as explained by Anne.
For a lady, if you have given birth, never give up. For fistula is a treatable disease. So, if you have it, you should not get worried about it and be proud of yourself. Since many people have gotten healed and they are now happy, as I am.
The last panel illustrates healing and the importance of being with other women who have also suffered from fistula. Esther makes that very clear.
Kukuwa na hawa ama vile unaona wengine wenzako inanisaidia juu hakuna mawazo kitu ninafikiria. Tunaweza share mafikirio, tunaweza kila mtu atatoa mjadala yake na hapo pia unapata advice. Anasema wenye wako na hii shida wasiogope juu ni kitu inaweza pata mtu kutokana na kuumwa sana ama kufanyiwa operation. Vitu kama hizo tu. Sasa wasiogope.
We hope you were inspired by those remarkable stories of resilience amongst fistula patients.
And we invite you to continue learning more about fistula by visiting our websites and social media sites. Asante Sana.